Hi, I'm Nick Allen. Welcome to another episode of the Outliers podcast. Today we have a special guest.
Hi, my name is Will Verastegi. I am a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. I am a student of Stoic philosophy. I'm also a product manager at a financial institution, and I'm a gay male in my late 20s living in the DC area who also loves traveling. I'd say those are the aspects of my identity that color the way I spend my time. And I also happen to be brother to Nick Allen.
And today we are here to talk about your jiu-jitsu experience. And I want to talk about how I find it very interesting how you've been in jiu-jitsu for how long now?
So I started when I was 12 and I'm now 27. I took more or less an 8-year hiatus during that time.
So how many years would you say you spent regularly practicing jiu-jitsu?
So I would say around 7 years total of dedicated practice. And during my 8-year hiatus, it was more so like I would train every now and then. I would train sparingly in the summer times or between semesters and what have you, but I didn't really train significantly enough to get better. So 7 years of dedicated practice is what I would say.
And in that time, you kind of have a good idea of here's what it takes for me to get better. Here's what it takes if I want to get a black belt. I know you're very committed to becoming a black belt. So I want to talk about what is your mindset when it comes to jiu-jitsu? How long do you think it'll take for you to get your black belt?
So I'm 27 now. I got my purple belt 6 months ago, and I'm hoping that I'll have my black belt by early 30s, ideally 30 or 31, probably 31, so maybe another 4 years to get there.
And as someone who spent so much time with jiu-jitsu, what is your mindset into all this time and effort you put into the craft?
So, in terms of philosophies that I have when it comes to training, first and foremost, and this regards my dedication to it, is that I want to dye a black belt, and I'm not getting any younger. So, because I started at such a young age, many of the kids that I trained with don't train anymore. I don't keep up with them, but those that did keep training that I do keep up with are mostly all black belts by now. In some case, they've been black belts for years. And I don't necessarily regret the priorities I chose over jiu-jitsu in the last decade, but I do recognize the consequence that is there's now this gargantuan delta in skill in what would have been if I hadn't had that big hiatus. So I'm not getting any younger. I want to dye a black belt. I have time to make up for, and I need to be as consistent as possible now.
And do you think that being in jiu-jitsu and being in the certain situation that you are, where some people are more advanced than you and some people are still learning, how do you think that's affected your perspective on the craft?
In terms of training with a community, a team that represents a variety of different skill levels, from white belts who are very brand new to experienced brown and black belts who can kick my ass blindfolded with one hand behind their back. I think a big aspect for me is that there's something that I can learn and refine from sparring with anyone. Now, obviously, if it's someone at my level or a higher level, that's a lot more apparent. It's a matter of just paying attention to what someone else is doing, how they're countering my moves, like what attacks they're doing, and just picking up any details I can. But even if it's someone who's at a lower rank than me, or at a lower skill level, I should say, because that's more important than the rank. I find myself challenging myself by saying I should be able to beat this person with using a small fraction of my strength, or by going at a much slower pace than what I'm actually capable of. So that way I can zoom in on specific details that enable me to focus on technique as opposed to speed or strength. Now, ultimately, you need to use technique, speed, and strength. But by hindering my speed and strength, I'm able to really focus on my technique against opponents who maybe otherwise I could beat with less effort, we'll say.
And what kind of process is that when you're training? Is it, oh, I need to learn this move, or I need to practice this move, or is there some new kind of method of training that you realize that you could explore?
So it depends. A lot of times, if there's a particular move or series of moves that I'm focused on that I'm not particularly comfortable with, maybe I know that I can hit a double leg takedown in half a second and have a 95% success rate with it. But maybe that's not really what I want to work on. Maybe there's a different takedown, or maybe there's a different sort of pass, a different technique that I am not yet comfortable with and that I need to focus on. So instead of doing the move where I know I'm going to score, where I know I'm going to win, I do the move that I want to be able to do and figure out sort of where are the kinks in my armor, what are the weaknesses that I have, and starting with sometimes an opponent who is not as skilled or as fast or as strong is a good way to start building that foundation for a given technique.
And when you say like you're attempting these moves, are you talking about during practice or during competitions?
Generally, during practice and competitions, the rule is that it's not the time to try a new move. So in the week or sometimes weeks leading up to a competition, I hear my coaches say a lot of now is not the time to try to work on something new. Now is the time to finalize your game plan. Like what are your core moves that you could do in your sleep? Really drill into those and make sure that your muscle memory is prepared for whatever a competitor or an opponent will bring against you. I think a month out is still enough time where you're able to explore more moves. I'd say, with the exception of competition, if I'm solely training and if then like day to day, my motivation in training is not to win any particular match or any particular competition, though of course like I want to compete and I want to win. My objective is that I want to have beautiful, graceful, technically sound and creative jujitsu. So in that endeavor, I do want to try new moves. I do want to expand my existing skill set, and that means working on skills, working on techniques that I have not yet mastered, that someone is more likely to be able to counter than if I do my sort of bread and butter moves. But if I'm a week or 2 weeks out from a competition, and this also depends on how serious I am about that particular competition, then I don't want to try a new move that might have a 50% success rate. Like I'd rather try a move where I think I have a 90 or 95% success rate, and I want to drill that shit nonstop the week beforehand so that way I have a solid game plan and that it's as bulletproof as possible.
So the focus more is on mastery of what you already know.
With the exception of a single competition, it's more so like, what's my long-term goal here? And my long-term goal is not to do a single leg takedown a million times, though that's also something that I should do. It's I want to be able to expand my existing foundation of jiu-jitsu into areas that I'm not currently comfortable. Because building that foundation is how you get better, as opposed to just doing 1 or 2 or 5 moves a million times.
And with all this discussion about mastery of certain moves and getting better before competitions, how do you handle defeat after all this effort and then ultimately someone beats you with an armbar or something?
Yeah, so when it comes to defeat, I emphasize that I'm always going to learn more from losses than victories, or at least the vast majority of the time. And I don't think that's a jiu-jitsu or a martial arts specific thing. I think that applies to most, if not all, areas of life. Another key thought, and I've said this to myself and I've said this to friends at competitions when they've had particularly rough days and not performed as they expected, is that every match is preparation for the next one. I don't want to lose any match. I'm going to, but it's not about that match. It's about that match getting me ready for the next one and the one after that and the one after that. Because ultimately, the short-term goal in any competition is to win, but the long-term goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to develop top-tier, graceful, technically sound jiu-jitsu. And I mean, I'm definitely not in the sport to lose, to be clear, but yes, I'm in the sport to master it above all else.
You don't hop on the mat like, oh, someone's going to kick my ass today.
Oh, I do, and because I say that to myself, and then it happens fairly consistently. But that's how you get better. I think getting your ass kicked in the martial arts world is probably the best way to get better, as long as you know you're not breaking limbs and whatnot, because we only have one body. So
Yeah, I remember being in wrestling in high school, and I learned that you learn a lot more from defeat and self-reflection, saying that, oh, this is where I'd go wrong. Like, what my big thing was, I was really bad on my feet. I was really slow, really sluggish, and that was something I knew I needed to improve on, especially when an opponent could take advantage of that. And I'm sure it's similar in jiu-jitsu where someone's on top and bottom, and you recognize, here are my shortcomings.
yeah, absolutely. And with that said, so you said you weren't good on your feet. So in thinking about having a well-rounded game, a well-rounded strategy or skill set, if you're not good on your feet, you're not going to focus solely on everything on the ground. If you say you're not good at something, then that's something that you need to particularly hone in on, especially if you have the opportunity to go against opponents who maybe don't have your same skill level just yet, to give you a chance to really work on the details.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever a moment in jiu-jitsu that was particularly humbling for you? Like maybe a moment where you realized like I have a long way to go or I have a lot to learn?
So I can think of more general experiences. I will say, so when I started competing as an adult around a year and a half ago, that was a pretty successful experience for me. To be fair, I'd been a blue belt for like 8 years at that point. So it was very much a mindset of, yeah, I better do this well. Like, I better go out there and just demolish guys, and because I want to get my purple belt already. But I will say, I remember competing as a kid when I was 15, and my opponent was someone I trained with and someone that I would consistently beat. He had started jiu-jitsu before me, but I remember there was some point where I was just always consistently able to beat him. And I lost via armbar to him, and I remember being super upset and like astonished at the idea that I lost to him. And I think about it now, and what my coach preaches, what I also preach as well, is that you don't tap to an opponent, you tap to a technique. And I think that kind of takes away the personal, like emotional aspect of a given loss. But otherwise, I wouldn't say there's one particularly humbling experience that comes to mind. It's mainly just been like seeing my old teammates become black belts over the years is something that I feel this sense of pride and joy for them, but also very, very humbling to see that happen. Meanwhile, I'm getting excited about getting my purple belt after a decade, and recognizing that most of my current coaches, who they're great coaches, I'm very fortunate to train under the coaches that I have. Many of them started jujitsu after I did, but they simply have had more dedicated years than I have because, again, they didn't take an 8 year hiatus.
But you've like managed, as you mentioned, all your interests in the beginning and who you are as a person with loving to travel.
Mm-hmm.
You have a whole life that isn't dedicated to jujitsu, so you're kind of working jujitsu into everything else.
Right, right. It was always something that was on the back of my mind throughout that time. It would come up in conversation. I always knew I was going to come back to it. That was never a question in my mind. But at the end of the day, it being on the back burner, it being something that I could bring up in conversation is not the same as actually taking action and actually working on it. And I think that's something that I realize now, and I don't want to take any more hiatuses where I just reference jujitsu. I want to stay committed, which is why I got my tattoo.
You have a tattoo that you intend on filling out as you become a podcast, as you become, as you become a black belt.
Yeah, so I've been wanting to get this tattoo for a while, and I knew I wanted to wait until I got my purple belt. But on my left thigh, I have the outline of the 5 jiu-jitsu belts. The colors are white, blue, purple, brown, black. And I have the first 3 belts filled in. So the white belt, well, it has a little bit of gray in it, is how she colored it in. Blue and purple are filled in, and the brown and black are empty. And I'll be going back to get those filled in as I get my brown and black belt, respectively. That tattoo is super important to me because when I took that hiatus, I would talk about jujitsu, but it wasn't necessarily anything that was tangible, that was real at the time. And having this on my thigh is my constant reminder of, I don't intend to take any more than a month or two off at a time if I happen to be traveling or sick or what have you, things come up. But having this tattoo on my thigh is a permanent commitment to jujitsu, because it's at least a commitment until I get my black belt, because I have an unfinished piece of art on my body that represents my unfinished journey with jiu-jitsu. Now, technically, once I get my black belt, my journey still will not be done, but this is at least memorializing the one journey that I'm on in my life where I see the opportunity to see it through to completion.
Because you have that tangible goal, and if you don't become a black belt, you'll just die with its half-finished tattoo.
Right, exactly. And that gets back to, I think I referenced this originally, is that I want to dye a black belt. And I've had, this sounds bad, but I don't know, I think about mortality a lot. Like you know this, you know that
Yeah.
we talk a lot about death, maybe a strange amount. Um,
It freaks me out
and
sometimes. I'm like, what aren't you telling me?
but I can think of some times where I've been in vulnerable situations. I won't say life or death situations, but vulnerable situations where I'm just like, damn. I remember a time in January when I was in Brazil where I was in what we'll call a vulnerable situation. I was like, I'm probably not going to die, but I really hope I don't because I think I'm going to get my purple belt this month. And I at least want to dye a purple belt, not a blue belt. And then I got my purple belt that month. And now, if, hopefully I don't die anytime soon. But if I die with my purple belt, I'll think, I would have rather died a brown belt, but at least I made it to purple. And brown belt, same thing.
You would have preferred to have died
A black belt than a brown belt, but at least I can make it to brown belt. Although though purple is a much more aesthetic color than brown, I'll say that. But yeah, ultimately it's incomplete, and if I die with this incomplete tattoo, then that is what it is. But at least I have this memorialized on me.
Yeah, and that's a greater commitment than most people can say. Like if I was a purple belt, I'm like, okay, well, I could quit now and there would be no repercussions. But if you quit, then you die. You look like a schmuck because you have.
I wouldn't say I look like a schmuck. I think if I had this tattoo till I was 50 and it remained incomplete, then I think I would look like a bit of a schmuck. But I think if I were to die in the next couple of years with an unfinished tattoo, that would be kind of like a beautiful tragedy. But at the very least, if I'm stripped naked and dead and my body is just there, then the one thing that you can determine from just glancing at my body is that I got my purple belt in jiu-jitsu or my brown belt or my black belt. And I think that exemplifies my passion and commitment for the art.
And you said something earlier that I want to go back to about how you don't lose to a person, you lose to a technique. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so the idea is that if someone beats you, if someone submits you, it is not necessarily because they are fundamentally more skilled than you or they are fundamentally superior to you, as much as it is that your techniques, your particular position at that moment in time, your thought process, and your muscle memory at that particular moment in the match was not ready to counter the technique that your opponent tried on you. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember the specifics of that match other than getting armbarred and tapping out maybe a second too late and my elbow hurting. But ultimately, whatever was happening at that exact moment in time, I clearly did not have good enough positioning to be able to prevent him from armbarring me. And this is vague, but I think maybe my posture was not high enough. I was not having good enough control over my arms. In jiu-jitsu, a common saying is an extended arm is a broken arm. Mm-hmm. So my memory is frail because this was a million years ago. Yeah. But I assumed that my arm was overextended. I assumed that there is some fundamental principle that I now am aware of and am continually trying to work on and, sometimes still do get caught. Mm-hmm. But there was a principle that was missing that led to me getting armbarred. So it's like, I don't know anything about that guy. He's not one of the black belts as far as I know. But I don't know if he kept up with jiu-jitsu or not. But
it was just a humbling experience.
Either way.
A memorable one.
Yeah, either way, I hope he's well. But I don't really think about it too often. It's not like it's something that has been sitting with me forever, but I will say the term an extended arm is a broken arm comes out of my mouth probably like every other practice, especially when I'm training with lower belts. Mm-hmm. Because it's a thing that people do. People let their arms be extended and then you get armbarred. And I always say, even whether I'm armbarring someone or if they armbar me, I say an extended arm is a broken arm.
So would you say you can break down a typical jiu-jitsu match into what the aggressor is trying to do versus how prepared the defender is against it? Like if I'm trying to put an armbar on you, it is how good am I at the armbar versus how good are you at defending the armbar?
So yes, but I feel like that's a bit of a simplification because it's not only that, it's also how is your timing for the armbar? Because if you're going for an armbar and I'm expecting you to go for an armbar, or you're just not in the most advantageous of positions to go for a particular kind of armbar, then your odds of successfully executing that technique is not going to be very high. But a lot of times it's really about timing. It's about, okay, I'm going to have in a 6-minute match, like 2 seconds where my opponent is letting their guard down from a particular position. And sometimes, and it happens often in training, where I'll have a 6-minute match against a really solid opponent that has a very comparable skill level to my own. And the deciding factor in, am I going to beat them or is it going to be a draw? And by beat them, am I going to submit them or sweep them, whatever, and somehow establish dominance, is not, am I going to keep shooting the same move every 5 seconds? It's, am I going to keep them busy and then time it where they take a second to breathe, they let their guard down in some way, shape, or form, and then I execute the move when they give me the opening to do it.
I know it's technical, but it sounds very technical the more you go into it.
It is, but one thing that I will also say is that as I get further into jiu-jitsu, and this was something I started to notice maybe a year ago while I was still a blue belt, is that the farther along you get, yes, there's more techniques to learn. There's always, 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 always more techniques to learn, but it becomes a lot more about principles than it does about memorizing specific techniques.
Well, what do you mean by principles?
Yeah, so principles around balance, around timing, like I referenced, around having strong grips and breaking strong grips, making sure that you're the person who is driving the direction of the match, but also at the same time, if someone is forcing you in a certain direction, if someone is forcing you to go a certain kind of way, being able to not just react and maybe push back directly against whatever they're doing, but maybe someone's trying to take you down and you let them drive their energy into you and you go with it and you then take advantage of wherever they're directing their energy to be able to capitalize on it. So I'd say it becomes a lot more strategic. Chaining together moves is a common thing. Like one thing that I realized in the last few months while sparring is how valuable it is if, say, you're grappling with someone, you're standing, and you get one grip on your opponent, and then a variety of different things happen once you have that grip. Maybe they take you down, or you take them down, or what have you. But if you're able to maintain one grip from the time that you initiate contact to the time that you execute a submission, then you're only minimizing the amount of energy that you have to put into that given chain to ultimately execute or submit your opponent.
Because it's not like you're jumping around. You are focused, and you know if I grab the arm like this, then I just need to bring it, go through these motions, and then I can submit it without ever moving my hand from the zone.
Right, and sometimes, with that said, that's not to say you get one grip in jiu-jitsu and then you hold on to it for dear life. But sometimes you do. You have to kind of make an observation of, is this particular grip, is this particular position, is this particular technique still serving me, or am I just yanking at something that isn't really helping me to advance my position? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is this isn't helping me advance my position, I need to try something else, then you do that. But if you are able to utilize a particular grip and a variety of techniques related to that grip or related to that position to continually advance your position, then keep advancing your position until whatever position or whatever technique or grip you're utilizing no longer serves you. Then switch it up whenever you hit a wall.
And I want to ask another question because this came to me. I've used the word mastery to describe what it is you're seeking before, and you kind of denied that it's not mastery that you seek, or mastery isn't the word that I should be using. Can you expand on why?
Yeah, so mastery is a very fickle thing. I think when I think mastery, it implies a complete dominion over a particular set of knowledge, over a particular skill set, which in this case is jiu-jitsu. And for me, I've previously discussed the end point of jiu-jitsu to be getting my black belt, getting from my third belt to my fourth belt, which is brown, to my fifth belt, which is black. But even then, that's not to say you now know everything there is to know about jiu-jitsu. People have spent lifetimes studying jiu-jitsu and studying various other martial arts, and there's always more to learn. There's always an evolution of the art. So learning is a very continuous thing. And again, I don't think that's martial arts or jiu-jitsu specific.
I remember being told this when we did jiu-jitsu as kids with Gracie Baja. And for those of you who don't know, Gracie Baja is like one of the greatest jiu-jitsu masters of all time. His family...
So Gracie Baja is a particular school of jiu-jitsu, we'll say, and I forget who. I think it was Carlos Gracie Jr. We'll probably cut this. We'll cut this out if I'm incorrect about any of this. But I believe Carlos Gracie Jr. was the founder of the Gracie Baja School, and if it wasn't him, it was another member of the Gracie family. But the Gracie family is the original founding family of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that founded the art based off of traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu in the early 1900s.
But I remember the story of one of the older members of the Gracie family he was teaching a class full of black belts, and they said, do you all want to practice like an armbar, or do you want to spar? And they all said that every single one of them said they wanted to spar. And then he proceeds to submit every single one of them with an armbar. And then ask them again, do you want to practice, do you want to spar? And everyone says practice. Because they recognize, if he could do the same thing to all of us, we still have a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm. And, I think that both of those things are important, though. So I would say, if presented with that dichotomy of, do you want to practice this single armbar, do you want to spar? First off, I think most people would choose to spar. And that's not to say that you're not learning while you're sparring. If someone armbars me in training or in a competition, then I'm going to learn something from that. And I think both of those things fit together. Like, you need to have a balance of both. But given the option of one or the other in terms of what's going to make me better, if I simply 24/7 practice techniques but don't actually spar, like do live sparring, I am fairly confident that would not get you to a level of mastery the same way that sparring would. Mm-hmm. But, they both work together to create the whole.
Yeah, because there's I know what move I'm going to do, and I know what kind of technique I need to practice, and then there's how can I practice implementing this in someone who's not going to just give me the win. I want to know your thoughts. What concepts are common to you in both jiu-jitsu and in life?
I love this question. So I really love this question because I feel like it happens quite a few times while I'm training, especially while I'm sparring with lower belts, where I'll give them a piece of feedback after I catch them in a particular move, and I'll say, this applies in jiu-jitsu and this also applies in life. And I wish that I was better about writing these things down, but now that we're having this conversation, I'm going to start writing these things down after I spar with someone and say something like this. But one thing is, use your time and energy wisely. In jiu-jitsu, I think about this a lot because I'm 27, I'm still young, but my body is now like dying faster than it's replenishing cells. So I don't want to have joint pain. I want to be able to do jiu-jitsu long term. So that means I need to be smart about the things that I'm exerting my energy into when I'm sparring, in terms of what techniques I'm using, in terms of how I'm timing these techniques and all that. And I think that applies in anything and everything that we apply any amount of our productive hours to. It certainly applies a lot for me in work. Another one, so sometimes you get caught off guard. Train yourself to act and react swiftly and gracefully. This can mean I'm training with a lower belt and then they catch me in an armbar and I need to be swift to duck out of that. This can mean something catches me off guard at work, or something catches me off guard on just walking around outside or while I'm driving or with friends. Another one, they're on the same concept of grace. Technique and grace are the main priority, and strength is a necessary supplement. So this is more so a personal life philosophy. This isn't necessarily something that applies to others, but at least in jiu-jitsu, certainly doing a move correctly and cleanly and quote unquote gracefully, which is what I focus on a lot, is the first goal. Strength is 100% necessary because technique and grace are useless without a sufficient amount of strength. But strength is not the main goal. Strength is a support. Find peace in discomfort and clarity in chaos. My happy place is being on the mat, and sometimes that quote unquote happy place oftentimes it means I'm drenched in sweat, feeling like I'm going to pass out with like a busted lip and a nice shiner if I'm lucky. And
something to talk about when you
have something to make me look cool. And I think being able to find the beauty and the peace in this objectively very uncomfortable state sort of makes a lot of things in life easier. And I think whether your thing is martial arts or any other kind of sport or physical activity, or even if it's not a physical activity, I think that there's a lot of benefit in life from being able to find peace and discomfort. And then just generally, which the thing that I love about jujitsu, and I think that no matter who you are, whether jujitsu or martial arts or any kind of sport is your thing or not, is just general bodily awareness and autonomy. I think it's everyone's responsibility to know how to move their body in space, know how to balance, understand the ways in which every part of their body moves, and jujitsu trains you to understand these things very well. And I think that every single person should take up some sort of art, some sort of craft, some sort of sport that enables them to have that sort of quote unquote mastery of their own body.
I remember you've mentioned this before, and it's something I always find really interesting. You said pride and anger are poor motivators.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jiu-Jitsu, it's a very aggravating kind of sport. Like, I remember in wrestling, the second someone like taps my head, I'm like, oh, I'm on a murder spree. Or not as brutal, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, so I think pride is a very fragile thing. So I think the main issue with it's not bad to take pride in your physique, to take pride in your technique. Like I certainly take pride in having my purple belt in jiu-jitsu. But I think having pride as a core motivator just seems very fragile, because then all it takes is for you to lose against someone that you don't think you were supposed to lose against to really offset you and really cloud your judgment, really potentially impede you from learning and growing at the right pace. So for that reason, I don't think pride is a good motivator. When it comes to anger, anger is just such a volatile thing. And I think if anger is the thing that's motivating you, you're probably not thinking very clearly. Your judgment is surely going to be some amount of clouded. And ultimately, you're going to forget something small, and you're going to be much more likely to get caught by a technically sound opponent than you would otherwise. And ideally, anger is short-lived. Like, no one wants to be angry forever. Like, that's not a healthy way of living, and most people aren't. So if you're, say, really angry about something and really, really training to, say, get back at an opponent that you're angry at some point that anger is going to go away. And if your motivation goes away with it, again, you're not going to continue growing. One other thing I'll say on that note, which this is more so aggression, but when I think anger, I think aggression. And to be clear, being an aggressive fighter is obviously
beneficial.
Yeah, it's obviously a good thing. It's better than being a passive fighter. Maybe. Well, anyways,
it depends on your fighting style.
Right, it's nuanced. But aggression in itself is not bad. But I was having a conversation in the car with a white belt friend of mine, and he was talking about an upcoming competition, and he referenced that he was going to be competing against someone who had either hit him or scratched him in a previous competition, had somehow offended him, had somehow made him angry. And he said, I'm going to make sure that I'm really aggressive in that match. And I told him, okay, well, that's fine, but aggression cannot be the primary thing that you're looking to deliver. You need to focus on being smart and being cunning over focus on being just blindly aggressive. That aggression needs to come out at a very well-timed space with very well thought out or a very technically sound strategy. Because if you're not channeling it directly, if you're just like, oh, I'm going to run at you, well, like, you know, if your opponent has any clue what they're doing, they'll be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah. And I feel like this is something I'm taking away, and I want to know if I'm kind of understanding. I think that pride and anger kind of lack a certain level of introspection you need to improve, because you're ultimately not looking at yourself, you're looking at how you perceive yourself, and you're looking at someone else, either saying, I'm angry at you, I will be aggressive against you, or I should not have lost against you. It lacks that humility that you need to improve.
I think that's a very astute observation. I would say that definitely applies with pride, and I think hurt pride and anger can go together. Anger ultimately It's more of a secondary emotion than a primary emotion. It's an emotion that covers up some kind of hurt. It's an emotion that you don't feel sad. That way you don't feel that deeper level of hurt. But generally, yeah, I'd agree with that observation.
Do you have any other lessons that you have from jiu-jitsu that you want to talk about?
So I will say this isn't necessarily a lesson as much as just sort of me figuring out my own style in jiu-jitsu and in life. But I think that when I was younger and I was a much different person 10 years ago, for starters, I didn't have any joint pain back then. I think I prioritize grace a lot more now than I ever did. Like, I think if you ask my teammates how I fight, how I grapple, they would say, hopefully, that it's fairly graceful. I'm more like a snake than I am like a gorilla in terms of my style.
Mhm.
And I will say also that if you ask my friends about my personality, about how I am as a person, I don't think anyone, or actually, I'm fairly certain none of them would describe me as aggressive. I feel that jujitsu has given me an outlet for any sort of I don't want to say an outlet for aggression and frustration in the sense where that's the thing that motivates me when doing it, because as we covered, that's not the case. But it's given me sort of an outlet to release all of those sort of negative emotions to where in my daily life, I feel generally at peace because I have an activity, I have a sport, I have a craft that allows me to sort of let go of those emotions and express myself physically.
And then one final question. You're someone who has put years into this craft and
Mm-hmm.
who will likely put many, many more. And it's not easy. Most people don't make it as far as you have, and most people don't go on to become black belts. You seem very committed. What advice do you have for someone who wants to get into martial arts? And how do they improve, or what kind of mindset should they go into, whether it be jiu-jitsu or boxing? What would you say to them?
So I would say to simply show up. I think that's the single most important thing. And that's something that I've heard a lot of other people reference as well, in that however you feel in a given day, whatever your motivation might be, like, if you want to get into a martial art and you want to continually advance and you want to ultimately be a black belt, then you simply need to show up every day. And some days you might really impress yourself with the things that you're learning and your ability to catch on to certain movements and certain concepts. And other days you might feel like shit and you might feel like you didn't learn anything or like you didn't do as well as your skill level. But the single most important thing is that you keep showing up, because with time that will pay off and you will see that in your skill level.
So it kind of like more effort and presence is more important than, say, innate talent or something of that nature.
Oh, definitely. I don't really believe in innate talent, truthfully.
You just believe in there are people who put in effort and those who don't.
Right, right. I mean, I guess maybe some people are more inclined, like there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, and some people have more, I don't know what they
You
officially
could
call it.
physical intelligence?
Yeah, some people have more sort of like bodily intelligence or musical intelligence or have some kind of inclination towards a certain thing, but that doesn't make you Mozart. That doesn't make you Carlos Gracie.
Mhm.
It's the dedication and that goes towards whatever it is that you're deciding that you're going to do.
That brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to record. I'm Nick Allen, and I've been with William Verastegui. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Outliers Podcast.